Cathexis is the episode in which we have a possessed one character and another character who isn't actually with us, that is to say, possessed Tuvok and the brain dead. Possessed Tuvok is trying to get the crew in order to enter a nebula so they can steal the crew and steal their life energy. Chakotay is wandering around the ship as sort of a neural energy being, trying to possess people and take over in order to try and accomplish certain facts in order to save them. Now let's get this out of the way right off the bat. This episode sounds a lot like two episodes, kind of mishmashed together from TNG. No, I don't know their names, and I'm not going to look it up. But that is one of the bigger problems I have with this episode. Is both of the main points of this episode are both points that have already been done. And while those episodes were at the very least average, they weren't episodes I actually particularly care for, if you know what I mean, but over in TNG. Now, I'll talk about that more in depth later. Ultimately, I actually have very few comments about the episode itself, except for a few things which I'll go into in a minute here. Now, I'm going to talk about the holodeck at length in this video. I'm going to save that for the mid part here. I'm also going to talk about the holonovel a little bit in relation to that. But let's go ahead and start talking about the Chakotay brain dead thing. Now, first of all, people in Trek who have been removed from their brain or removed from their body and then coming back to it is not a new thing. That doesn't bother me. That's not my problem here. My problem is it's done in a way that is kind of vacuous and ultimately has no real impact on anything, if you know what I mean. It's obvious to see what the intent was. The intent was to have a genuine twist. The point was that throughout the episode you were supposed to picture the possessing creature to be the problem, whereas, it was actually Chakotay trying to save the ship. That was what they were going with, but it's presented in such a vacuous method. As I've already said, if I'm repeating myself, that's how disinteresting this is. But also, there's another problem, and this is the biggest problem with this whole episode, and indeed one of the problems Voyager has in general, Star Trek has in general. I mentioned in the last episode, Heroes and Demons, the idea that the audience tends to pick up on things faster than the characters does. Maybe it's because the writers tend to underestimate us, I'm not sure. But this is probably the worst example of that I've seen to date in Voyager. Now, let me make this clear. They have a scene where, Janeway, this is towards the very end of the episode. This is like 30 minutes into the episode, where Janeway says, "Computer, who authorized that ejection of the warp core?" And the computer says, "It was, authorized by First Commander Chakotay." And there's this shocked look on their faces, like, "Oh my God, it's Chakotay," and there's actual reaction to this. There's surprise. This is what I mean by the mystery being weakened and the audience figuring out before they do, because they act as though this is the first time they have put two and two together. One of the first things we find out in this episode, in the teaser in fact, is that Chakotay is brain dead. All his neural energy has been drained. Note the usage of the word drained, not destroyed, not wiped out, drained. And the next thing we find out is there's a consciousness running around doing things, and Tuvok is acting strange. I'm sorry, but anybody who, even someone who hasn't seen Star Trek, could probably put two and two together on this one very early. And someone who has seen Star Trek probably put two and two together the first time they saw the first little, pseudo vision. Even if that doesn't give it away, the first time Kes is like, "Hello, is anyone there?" and feels the presence of Chakotay, that's enough by itself. So in other words, within about 8 minutes or so of the episode, we've figured it out. We know the big twist. This is a problem Star Trek has. This is the problem right here. They base this whole episode around the concept of this twist, which we figured out before the first act ended. Now, whether or not the problem is writing a good mystery, writing something that people aren't going to guess is difficult to do, especially one that's going to be interesting on repeat viewings. And that is, in my opinion, one of the biggest problems with this episode. If it's not obvious, I don't care for this episode all that much. I don't think it's bad, like some other episodes I could mention, like Ex Post Facto here in the first season. But it's just disinteresting to me. There's so little I have to say about it. In fact, almost all of my comments this video are going to be about my changes, in total contrast to the last video where I had almost no changes. But yeah, that's just an issue, and there's one other thing I want to mention here with regard to this. Possessed crew members is something that's happened more than a few times in Star Trek. More than a few times. It's kind of a commonality, actually, at this point. I've heard someone once comment that it's something of a rite of passage to have your first possession by an alien or whatever within Star Trek, because it is a very common thing, relatively speaking, almost ludicrously so when you really get down to it. So this is not something new. And Tuvok being possessed by whatever, again, nothing new. It's something so normal that I don't have anything to say about it. But the reason I bring this up is that people within universe almost never bring up the fact that it's common and normal. When someone acts a little bit unusual, or someone starts to act out of the ordinary, nobody ever it never occurs to anybody to be like, aha, are you, blah blah blah. No, no, no. And something about that just kind of makes me think, I am actually lying. There's one exception to this. In the original series, Turnabout Intruder is actually the episode I'm talking about. And I can't believe an original series episode, before TNG even existed, is one of the only episodes in all of Star Trek to actually point out the fact that odd things happen on this ship, and maybe that's what happened. Anyways, one other thing I want to comment on is the continued assassination of Neelix as a character. His reaction to Kes in this episode, as she mentions her feelings to him, is not worth commentary. Not a good thing. Net negative. And he has a scene after Kes has been assaulted by Tuvok, or rather possessed Tuvok, and he's like, "Oh my God, are you one of them?" He has this whole thing, and it's not just cliche. It's cliche so bad it hurts. It feels like it's character assassination. I don't know what else to call it. It's doing a disservice not just to the audience, but to the character, because even my envisioned Neelix, which I think is a little bit better fleshed out than the one they were trying to present. Well, I'm sorry, even the one they were trying to present, which isn't quite to the extent that I would want, aka my envisioned Neelix, let's say that properly, doesn't. It isn't so stupid, isn't so blindly to be like, aha, you're the alien. It's so over the top that it's pointless. It's not funny. It's not interesting. It might as well not have even been there. Now, let's talk about the Hollow Novel. I want to talk about the positive things about the Hollow Novel thing first. Well, actually, I want to talk about that second because I want to mention something first. For those of you out there who are just watching Voyager for the first time, let me warn you that this Hollow Novel thing with Janeway and I don't even remember what they named it. There's actually quite a bit of information on it because they put quite a bit of effort into it. Is something that will be recurring for a while, relatively speaking, until finally it was basically voted off the show because nobody liked it. Now, let me make something clear. This is the positive thing I want to mention. They actually did put a great deal of effort into this. The set design and location was actually quite nice. The they put a great deal of effort into the period dresses, into the style in which they make tea. There was a great deal of research done in order to make it as authentic as possible. Definite props there. And I have to say that I personally think that one very good thing did come of this. Only one thing. Just one. We get to see Kate Mulgrew acting. Now, certainly she does get her occasional times when she gets to play Janeway as an actual character. This has happened before, and it will happen again. But while she's playing Mrs. Doubtfire, or whatever the heck her name was, Davenport, I believe, actually, she does actually get to act. And I like that. I like seeing Mulgrew actually being able to act. She's a competent actress. She's a good actress. Yes, okay, that's great. But that is the only positive thing I have to say about that. And let me really start talking about the holodeck, because this is the time in which it really comes out. Almost the entirety of the teaser of this episode is this damned holo novel. Almost all of it. In some other episodes, which I'll be covering in the future, obviously, we haven't gotten there yet, the holo novel will be the entirety of the teaser. Just the holo novel, nothing else. I don't even know where to begin with that, but let's just talk about the problem with the holodeck in general. And I mentioned all of this in brief back in Heroes and Demons. Let's imagine that there's a video game you out there like to play. I know that's a stretch because, that's kind of what I talk about primarily, in addition to Star Trek and other geeky things. But try if you can to imagine that you enjoy playing a video game. Let me pull a video game completely just off the wall here. Half-Life 2, okay? I mention this because this has actually come up with a friend of mine. A friend of mine started watching Half-Life 2, a YouTube playthrough. Now let me make this clear. There are certain games that I do feel you can get the full or near to the full experience of the game if you're just watching it. I don't want to name any examples because that sounds like an insult, and I don't mean it as one. But there is at least one game I can think of right off the top of my head. I might as well say it, Metal Gear Solid 4. What Metal Gear Solid 4 is a game that I believe that if you watch one of those 100% playthroughs, you do get a fair amount of the story, the effort, the image evolve, and playing it is somewhat is not as necessary to the enjoyment of the game as it is in other circumstances. Okay. Um, that's not an insult to the game. Let's make that clear. And I'm not trying to make a joke about the lots of cinematography, lots of cutscenes thing. I'm not. I'm just stating my opinion on the matter. But it is also my opinion that, those games like that are in the minority. Most games, if you want to get the full experience, you have to experience the interactive part of the interactive media, right? Half-Life 2 is a game that is very much that in spades. This friend of mine was started to watch Half-Life 2 and basically wasn't getting it. There was nothing there, and I had recommended to her to go ahead and pick it up and play it. This hasn't happened yet. I'm going to lend her my copy and, give her some cheat codes in case she needs to go through it with cheats on in order to actually experience it. But I did let her play, I'm sorry, no, I didn't let her actually play it. Like I said, we haven't gotten to that yet. I was thinking about another game, but this is something that has come up before. The experience is different when you're playing a game than when you're viewing it 99% of the time. I think most of us can agree with that, right? That being said, imagine, well, okay. Now imagine something worse, if you will. Imagine that not just are you watching someone else, watching a YouTuber or whatever, but you're actually watching someone else playing the game. Like for example, if there was someone sitting over there and I had some kind of game going here and I'm playing the game and they're watching me play the game. Now, let's make this clear. I've done backseat driving game before. That is very different. It is an intentional way of getting multiple people to cooperate within a single player game, and that's something that I'm rather pleased with the whole concept and how that's come out. That's not what I'm talking about. Imagine if I'm just sitting there playing I don't know. Let's pick a really pertinent game here. You know what? I'm just going to go with Half-Life 2. I'm sorry. I'm just going to go with Half-Life 2. Because a shooter works well for this. Because I'm running around constantly trying to do my thing, shooting these guys, hitting these guys with the program, moving here, doing the jumping puzzles. And all they're doing is watching. They're not actually backseat driving. They're not actually commentating. They're just watching me play this game. They are probably going to be pretty bored, all things considered. There are some people who enjoy that sort of thing. I don't actually know anybody like that personally, so I'm kind of guessing actually that there are some people who like that sort of thing. But the overall implication is that they either aren't enjoying the experience, aren't paying attention, or want to play themselves, right? All of this is a breakdown for the obvious point that I'm leading towards here. The holodeck is the ultimate end-all of video gaming technology. It is about as immersive as it is possible to get. A semi-sentient machine that can be fully adaptive and fully programmable and actually have you have the sensation of playing the game yourself, right? And we're watching someone play the game. Now, again, that can work sometimes. Has worked sometimes. But most of the time, the reason the holodeck episodes tend to fail is because of this basic principle. It's like the Rise of Planet episodes, of which there have been 3, I believe. Let's see, there was the DS9 one, the TNG one, and the Enterprise one. Yeah. All 3 of those episodes were kind of bad. I give Captain's Holiday some credit for introducing Vosh, but of those 3, the other 2 are abysmal. And it's the exact same principle in action. Why would you ever do an episode on a holiday planet that doesn't have something to do that basically doesn't have to do with the holiday, if you follow me? I don't want to watch someone else go on holiday. I don't want to watch someone else relaxing on the beach. I want to relax on the beach. You follow me? I get no enjoyment from seeing someone else playing a video game. I want to play a video game. You understand me? So it's the same exact concept. When you take something and remove the essential element, in this case the interactive element, all you're doing is painting a picture, basically. And it's just generally disinteresting, and this is why the holodeck episodes keep failing over and over. There have been a few exceptions, like I said. But this holo novel and its interactions is the main reason why I don't like it. And there's another reason I'll get into. There's actually a bigger reason than this. This is just the fundamental reason that I think all of us can agree on. Is that while Janeway, the character, no doubt enjoys playing in her little holo novel, whatever it's called, I'm sorry, one of these ones I need to look up the name, I just don't care that much right now. While the character no doubt enjoys playing the thing, we are now watching an actor playing a character playing another character in her little fantasy life escape from the fantasy life that we're watching. You get where I'm getting. This is like Inception here. If we're getting to it, it's just layers, and all of it's dull because that's not what we want to see. We want to see the character Janeway, not the character Janeway doing this. With one exception. Now here's the point. Okay. I spoke rather well of the holodeck interactions of the French pool hall back in whatever episode that was. I believe that was the Cloud. Yes, it was the Cloud. The reason why is very simple. In that episode, that French pool hall, even as is, existed as a way to explain Tom Paris to us. His past, his motivations, his mindset. We learned about him through his interactions on the holodeck. That's using the holodeck properly. Just seeing Tom playing pool for a while and not really commenting on it or expositing to Harry, that wouldn't have been interesting. That would have been the exact same problem. Now, of course, in my changed version, I would have expanded upon that, but the same basic premise was already there. In these holonovels, we don't see anything about Janeway that's pertinent or interesting. We don't learn anything about her other than the fact that she has a predilection for this kind of form of fiction. Okay, that's it. That's all. I mean, I've got nothing else. It's like learning that Tuvok happens to like Klingon opera. Okay. That doesn't tell us anything about Tuvok, you know? Actually, I could say that about Worf, too, but because he does actually like Klingon opera. You get the point, though. It is complete and utter filler that is a complete and utter waste of time. They could have at least used it to try and tell us something about the Janeway character rather than just show the Janeway character in her off hours. That's my big problem with the usage of the holodeck in Voyager, and it will continue for many episodes. I will try to be brief the next several times it comes up. Indeed, it comes up again in season 1, even in the last episode, the one I've already mentioned several times. I can never think of the damn name of it, which is just frustrating to be on words. But anyways, do I have any other notes before I get to the big point? Not really. I do have one other note. Okay, let's go ahead and go over this. Did I enjoy the episode when I saw this initially? Yeah, it was alright. Do I enjoy this episode now? A little bit less, to be honest with you. I don't think this is a bad episode. I just think it's normal. On a 1 to 10 scale, I would just rate this a 5. It's normal. It's there. It occupies time, and then it goes away. This is one of those episodes I ended up kind of skipping through a few scenes because they were just dragging on, and I was like, okay, come on. That being said, episodes like this are the ones that really tickle my brain, if you know what I mean. I really, really end up thinking about episodes like this. There's two kinds of episodes I really end up. The normal ones, like this one, and the bad ones, like Ex Post Facto. Both of these episodes, I spent considerable time and effort really thinking about them, really thinking about what I would do with them and how I would change them, that sort of thing, right? Because basically because of the limitations I laid down for myself. If I could just eject the episode completely and write something new, that'd be easy. One of the reasons I like putting limitations on myself in my writing is because it encourages creativity. I've talked about this before. And while obviously there's certain limitations and you have to approach this with a degree of moderation, when you approach a problem and only have 3 tools to fix it, it tends to engage your brain more. Tends to. Often, not always. Tends to engage your brain more so you can actually be more creative in its solution. I'd like to think that this is an example of this for the reasons I'm about to go into here. You see, one of the rules I've had is that I've tried to not just rewrite the series, because if I did, it would reach the point at which, here's the actual Voyager plotline. My plotline would be way up here. I would have veered so far off course that by the 5th, well before now, I would have already reached a point at which it would be like, here's this episode, let me talk about this episode, blah, 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 blah. Alright, now my episode over here on the side, which is in a completely different place than this, but, I would have just completely rewritten the series and been done with it. So I had to limit myself within the scope of the episode I'm looking at and how I would change it. The next limitation I said was I have to keep at least the base tenets of the episode, either the main theme or the main plot point or something along those lines, which is also something that has been very restricting. This episode is probably the most restrictive example of that I've seen right now to date. The whole the Tuvok is not Tuvok thing and the Chakotay brain dead thing are both what I decided to make as the theme for this episode, for reasons I'll get into when I actually start outlining it. But even with those as a limitation, I just found myself struggling and struggling There are two big points I'd like to make before I go into my changes, okay? Number one, I mentioned earlier that this episode tends to rip off well, I shouldn't say rip off, it's not blatant, but it tends to be similar plot to two separate TNG episodes. No, I don't remember the names, no, I don't care. My revised plot tends to be similar to a DS9 episode. I didn't realize that until I was about halfway rewriting it, and I was like, ah, damn. And then I spent a solid hour trying to come up with another plot that kept with the same general concept, that the episode was about. Again, keeping within my rule set. I failed. I am apparently not that good of a writer. So I am borrowing an idea from DS9 unintentionally, and I got nothing for it. But there is one other change I'm going to make here. I have no idea how long I'm going to keep this up. I really don't. But from this point on, I'm going to try and keep an overall canon that is semi-conductive with Voyager's own canon in my mind. This is what I meant about that whole creativity thing and how it tends to come out. I have already talked about my ideas for the Kazon, and my ideas for the Vidians, and my ideas for the Telexians and the Terran Ox. I actually had to write down the name because I'm bad at. This is why I've talked about this before. This is why I tend to use names I already know so I can remember them easier. But the Terran Ox organization and the overall conclave, right? I have decided that at least for the next few episodes, basically as long as I can, and I have a feeling I could keep this at least up through season 2 and part of season 3, I am going to try and keep that overall idea and canon relatively in place within the scope of these changes to these episodes as I make them, okay? I am still going to limit myself relatively within the basic confines of the episode, for example, the same basic themes and tenets have to say, and I have to stick within the scope of this episode. The future episodes will be written when I get to them. This episode's now. So I'm still within my limitations, but I've decided to add this extra obstacle of trying to stick to this canon. One of the reasons why is because this canon has basically grown on its own. In a video I haven't actually done because I was halfway through it when I had to go, drive someone to the hospital, or almost drive. I actually didn't end up having to drive her to the hospital, but I thought I was going to have to for quite a while there. So I kind of dropped everything, is my point here. In the middle of that video, I started talking about my creative process for writing and for setting design, and one of the things that's always been true for me is it grows. This is one of the reasons I draw so many parallels from the holodeck to the human brain, is because both are dynamic, both are adaptive. Once you lay down the basic rules, figuring out where it goes from there is much easier, because all you have to do is think about what would logically happen next, what would make sense, and it just grows if you follow me. This is exactly what has been happening without me intending it to, and with some input from several of my viewers in their comments, and from several of the people I know and live with, who and talk with on a regular basis, who have commented on this thing. This whole conclave idea has basically been growing without me actually intending it to, as a way of forming a new Voyager canon that is at least moderately contained within the existing Voyager canon. And I like that. I like the fact that it just kind of happened. So I'd like to keep going with it, if you'll forgive me this indulgence. Now, um, okay, shoot, I thought I was going to say there's something else in there, and I can't actually remember it now. I'm sorry, it's really late. I've been recording a lot of videos tonight trying to get my queue set up so I can take a bit of a break. I've actually got 3 more episodes to go through after this. Moving on. Let me reiterate the situation for anybody who isn't familiar with it. There is a massive empire, huge, malignant, not particularly technologically advanced. They are known as the Conclave. They are very good at propaganda, they are very good at oppression, they are very good at making sure everyone wants to work under them or for them. They tend to play the political game a lot more than, say, I'd say than the Dominion, which is actually very true now that I think about it, because the Dominion tend to lean on the Jem'Hadar and the Vorta more than the Conclave does. The Conclave also has a very strong economic might going. Now, the Conclave also has been keeping their distance from the distance from Borg space. They actually have a buffer zone there, and they've been keeping it rather intentionally. It's probably been shrinking over time, but that's getting way ahead of myself, so let's pull back here. Within the Conclave are a number of member species, and indeed member alliances. I'll get to that in a little bit more. But for example, the Kazon, in my envisioning, the Kazon refers to the whole, is like the name of what we call our Navy. or here in the States, or the Marines, or something like that, or the SEALs. There's actually a better example. The Kazon refers to a number of different races who make up sort of a militant arm within this region of space. Not the whole conclave, just this area over here, and tend to employ even smaller groups like the Vidians, as I've already mentioned. Now, there is also a group that at one point in time was a fairly decent power within the region. They are called the Terran Ox. These people are not overtly evil. They are, I would liken, and I don't know what to liken them action to. I kind of have a mental image in mind of their general personality and mindset, but this is an alliance species, okay? Or rather, Terranok refers to the alliance, not the species. This is consisted of many different species, and all these species were worked together in this Terranok alliance at one point in time, and they had a decent amount of influence. They were wealthy, they were well off, they had a great deal of culture and luxury, and then the Conclave came and basically took over and said, all right, you may keep your saying as long as you work for us. And inch by inch, they started implementing policies, very small, very little policies, that started folding the Terranok within the Conclave. You understand? Now, with this setting laid out, the Terranok have been uh, bristling against the basic oppression or dominance of the Conclave for some time. Even though the Conclave is not actively oppressing them in a rather, forgive me for the term, a Nazi way, they are not, oh, we will kill you and we will do horrible things to you. The Terranok, nevertheless, are ultimately the slaves in this, or not slaves, that's a bad term. They are ultimately the subservients. They are ultimately the servants of the Conclave. They do not have true autonomy. Even though they do have some, they have to ultimately bow to the Conclave. And these are a proud people who don't like that fact, so they've been trying to find some means of viable resistance for some time, okay? Into this circumstance comes Seska, someone who, for the most of the first season, every time they've gone offshore, every time they've encountered any new alien, and has been talking to Neelix about this sort of thing, she has been learning more and more about this whole setting that I've been telling you about. Because Neelix, my Neelix especially, someone who has been around this area more than a few times and is a well-experienced individual, knows all about the Conclave and the Terran Ox situation. I would also make the Talaxians, as of this point in time, a member of the Conclave. That'll be important in Jetrel when we get to that. So, within this situation, Seska decided that the Terran Ox were her best option for trying to trade technology to, in order to assist Voyager in creating a power base out in the Delta Quadrant and assisting them in their trip home. Now, the idea here was to do a bit of a piecemeal thing and work with them in order to reverse engineer certain technologies. Only a few, only certain things, like for example, matter energy matter conversion and replication along with that, right? This led to the problem back in the episode State of Flux, where she ends up reverting. But one of the things I would have made a point in, and indeed I would keep this strong, is that she actually left on a Kazon vessel. Now, one of the reasons for that is that specific vessel is not truly loyal to the Kazon, aka the Conclave. It is in fact a vessel of hired mercenaries that the Terranok have hired. The whole reason for employing them there was just in case, because they're being careful and because Seska is intelligent, they wanted to make sure that the Terranok were not associated with this whole endeavor. Because if wind of this got to the Conclave up a higher command, we'd have problems. You understand what I'm going with it? Sorry, this is a lot of backdrop, but I wanted to really lay this out, because this is where I'm going to be going with from now on. Now, how does this relate to this episode? This episode starts. At this point in time, the Voyager crew know about the Terranok to some extent. I wouldn't have actually had any exposition, but they probably have heard about them. Neelix certainly would tell them about them, because they're probably approaching Terranok space at about this point, towards the end of Season 1. Let me rewind. Let me actually build this. I actually built most of the episode in my mind, and I need to rewind back to the beginning here to really get this clear. Voyager has been sending shuttles out to most... Okay, here we go. Voyager has been sending shuttles out to most of the nearby planets and systems within the region. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this. Number one, it is a lot easier for a shuttle... It's not easier. It's a lot more energy efficient. It takes less time, energy, and resources for a shuttle to go in and conduct a trade mission than it does for the whole ship to. You follow me? And as I've mentioned, that whole resource problem and energy problem has been something that's been a constant backdrop through all of Season 1, especially in my version of things. So this is why they send shuttles. Plural, by the way, very important. Voyager stays within a relatively safe, neutral spot and basically kind of holds keeping, tries to conserve resources in hopes that these shuttles will be successful. They keep communication contact relatively frequently, and Voyager is ready to go and help them should the need come to be. Now, several of these shuttles start coming back. This is where the episode starts, and Harry Kim comes back for one. He's like, "Captain, we've made a deal with the uh, acetaminophenes." I'm not good at names, you know that. And we could even have him start to talk about the specifics of, oh, we got this and that, and then Janeway could cut him off and said, tell the details to Taurus, she's in engineering waiting for you. And he's like, yes ma'am, and we could just start hearing news as the shuttles come in bit by bit, and have a little bit of exposition with Janeway and let's see. At this point, Janeway, Taurus, and probably Paris are the senior officers left on the ship, and just have Janeway and Paris both talking about this and being like, hey, this seems to be working out pretty well, and I would also probably give Paris a nod for part of the idea, as well as Chakotay. I think both Chakotay and Paris would have been on board with this idea to branch out, and because one of the important things here is not only do they want to make as many trades as possible within a short period of time, yes, it does stretch you thin, but when they're in relatively safe space, that's okay, because they need all those resources at once, but also they're trying to stock up because they're about to enter Terran Ox territory, and they can't figure. Terran Ox territory is sufficiently vast, not huge, but sufficiently vast that a detour around it would be irritating and difficult. So we're just going to go through it and hope for the best. So we want all these resources now because we cannot imagine that this is going to be pleasant because Neelix has warned them about the Terran Ox. You with me? Now, as all the shuttles come back, we would have a little bit of a scene with somebody, probably the Doctor, I'd say, talking about how happy he is that he has so much additional resources, maybe just plain old energy supplies, if nothing else, because he has been having trouble treating people lately, and now he has the additional assistance in order to make sure that they live. My point here in this whole scene is to show more of the Doctor, show his desire to heal, and actually showing that through his actions and through his comments to Kes. Now, several days pass, okay? I'm going to start skipping ahead a bit because I don't want to detail the whole episode in all its entirety, but several days pass, and one of the shuttles is not back yet, the one that contained Tuvok and Chakotay. Now, they start to worry about that, and finally they get a distress call, and they're like, okay. So Voyager zooms off to wherever the shuttle is, gets there, and finds the shuttle has been badly damaged, and they bring the shuttle in, and they find that Tuvok is wounded, and Chakotay is brain dead, okay? You'll notice I'm keeping the same themes here, the same tenets, but just bear with me here. Now, I like the Chakotay brain dead thing being still as is because, number one, the Doctor just started talking about how happy he was that he was going to be able to start healing people better, and then he immediately encounters this. Yes, I know the Doctor gets a lot of character revelation, but I think this would be a good example of doing it, even if it's only like a C plot. Basically, the Doctor being ultimately frustrated to the point of aggravation and talking about how irritating it is that, I can heal his body. I can make sure his body stays living forever. His heart will still keep beating. His lungs will keep doing it. But I can't do anything to fix him. The man is gone. It's just the sheer frustration he feels at his inability to heal Chakotay, even though everything medically is within his reach. He doesn't have the ability to actually fix his brain. And as he starts banging his head into the wall of this, the C plot would actually tie into the A plot. I'll get to that in a minute. We could also see several characters who basically don't want to give up on him. I would list Tom in there, of course. I would also very strongly list Taurus, and probably, oh shoot, I suddenly can't think of his name. I can't think of his name. It's the guy who dies in Basics. Oh, well, he's another Maquis individual. My point is I would have several people come by and be affected by this and offer to help and nothing for it, right? That's basically the C plot here. The B plot is, well, actually, I've already mentioned the B plot. The B plot is the overall situation. I'll get to that later, actually. The A plot, then, would be the fact that Tuvok is basically not feeling well, but he feels he's fit to duty, especially given the emergency of the situation, and Janeway acquiesces. Throughout the episode, I'm going to skip ahead quite a bit here. Throughout the episode, we would get several things. First of all, Tuvok is acting oddly. Not completely out of character, but he is definitely not acting full on like Tuvok, and someone who knows him well, like Janeway, has been catching on to it and isn't entirely sure what to make of it. She decides to keep her thoughts to herself for now. until it gets to the point where Kess starts to have really strange impressions every time she gets around Tuvok, mental images, mental whatever, and it reaches the point where Kess gets knocked out, as in the thing, and the doctor starts to treat Kess, and then the doctor gets shut offline. And at this point in time, Janeway is fully suspicious of Tuvok and is not sure what to make of it. So she starts approaching Neelix on this. Tuvok actually ends up getting the drop on them, takes them hostage, and brings, I should say Tuvok at this point because it's apparent it's not him, brings them to the bridge. This, by the way, the reason the C plot would tie back into this is when they, towards the end of this, while the doctor is treating Kess, he would also mention some irregularities in Chakotay, things that shouldn't be. He doesn't understand why the markers are the way they are, and there's some genetic decay that wasn't present the last time he scanned him, and he's not, and just kind of putting the pieces together until the fake Tuvok finally knocks him out in order to prevent him from giving everything away. So finally he takes the bridge hostage. Now I would have the fake Tuvok be actually quite cordial, all things considered. Very simply, I don't want to hurt you. I will kill you if I have to, but I would rather avoid that process. This phaser is set on stud on a wide setting, and it will take out all of you in one shot if I shoot this properly, and I know how to use this weapon. I have been instructed in its use. And it's this point that Janeway starts to put two and two together, and she realizes that whoever he is, he's someone that has been intentionally infiltrated, probably trained in this operation by Seska. And he says, yes, we have been in contact with Seska for some time. And it's at this point that Neelix points out what he was starting to tell Janeway earlier, that the Terran Ox are very good at cosmetic surgery and artificial clones for organ replacement. There's a better way to get that exposition across. What I just said is kind of blunt, but you get the point. They're very good with their medical technology. Might be a better way to put that. I don't know. But the general impression here is obvious that that individual isn't Tuvok at all. It's not even a possessed Tuvok. It's someone who has been surgically altered to look like him and has been coached by Seska how to act like a Vulcan. Obviously can't do the whole job, especially not to someone who knows him, but was able to do it well enough, especially with the fake Chakotay. The fake Chakotay was the clincher of the plan. With everyone's focus on the brain-dead Chakotay, very few people were actually looking at Tuvok to see how off he was. The brain-dead Chakotay is in fact just a brain-dead clone. It was never alive. In fact, it wasn't actually allowed. It was never brought to life, if you know what I mean. It never took its first breath until it was beamed on board, and the doctor started fixing the body, and then it started breathing, and the heart started beating. If you follow where I'm going with here. And so the overall plan here is for Tuvok now to try and take the ship. Unfortunately, he was hoping for this deception to last longer, so he now sends a signal out to his ship, which is a simple two-man vessel kind of thing, right? And he basically tells them, okay, we don't want to hurt you. We just want your ship and your technology. We have decided to be lenient, especially in light of our alliance with Seska and the various political and military prestige that this will bring us throughout the conclave. And this would be the first time the word conclave is actually mentioned, by the way. I wouldn't actually go into detail. I would just mention it. And I'm sorry, I'm still holding the phaser like I'm actually talking about Tuvok here. But he would. But we will evacuate your ship. We will analyze it. We don't know how long it will take, but you will be well cared for. You will be prisoners, but you will not be prisoners within a cell. We will simply have you under guard and house arrest kind of a thing. Once we are done with your ship and analyzing it, we will not tear it apart. We will simply analyze it so we can replicate your technology. We will give your ship back to you and give Seska back to you as part of the deal. And we will give you our blessing and escort and several resources in order to make sure that you can make the rest of your trip home safely. Now, Janeway, I'm not trying to make them out as good guys, quite the contrary. I'm just trying to say that the Terran Ox, at least at this stage, are not overtly the bad guys. They are not just stereotypically evil. They want to steal your stuff. They're willing to be amiable about it, but you have no choice. They're still stealing your stuff. At about a little bit of time passes, and we get some exposition across, and then the Terran Ox ship shows up, the little scout ship, and he's like, and he basically announces, I know it's going to be very difficult to pilot this ship by myself. I would like to ask you to help pilot it for me, but I know I can't trust you in that manner. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to release, anesthetine gas or something throughout the ship, and then we will do our best to remotely pilot, or we will do our best to pilot this ship towards the nearest Terran Ox planet that has been prepped for their ship, and we'll work from there. Now, as he's explaining this, the Terran Ox ship has already docked. sent its little codes. He's opened the shuttle bay. It is docked, and he's talking about this whole thing to them, and he's outlining, okay, here's how this is going to go. We're going to knock you all out. I will try to make it as painless as possible. I apologize for the email. Blah 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 blah. And then he starts programming in the anesthetine glass, and the turbolift bay opens, and Chakotay and Tuvok come barging out. Now, I'm sure you've already figured it out just the moment I said that, everything that happened, but let me go into it just to really make this clear. What happened is they had been taken prisoner by the Terran Ox on their vessel, and obviously for several days they had worked on the clone of Chakotay and perfecting the Tuvok cosmetic surgery. And as they were working with it, Tuvok and Chakotay, who are both, especially in my version, very intelligent people, both of whom are leader capacity, both of whom know how to fight, both in hand-to-hand and from ship to ship, and are probably, in all honesty, the worst possible people they could have kidnapped for this job. Not that they would really have known that. They broke free, took their Terran Ox captors prisoner, and took the ship and came back as soon as they got the signal to do so, because they figured they'd get the jump back on their imposter. They didn't want to just... Obviously, they don't have beaming technology, so they couldn't just beam back, and they didn't want to give everything away because they weren't entirely sure what the situation was. So as soon as the shuttle bay opens and they go ahead and dock, no one's there to greet them. They do a quick check of the computer, and it's like, okay, the imposter's on the bridge. Let's go stop him, And they come out, blast the Tuvok imposter, and immediately go and override the anesthetine control. And they're like, okay. And Janeway's like, Chakotay? Tuvok? And then we hear everything I just detailed to you. And then we're left with an interesting dilemma, because now we have to decide what to do with the Terran Ox. And the people are... I would have there be genuine discussion about this. The episode wouldn't end immediately with the stopping of the immediate threat, because the long-term threat is much more important, in my opinion. If we kill these people, and that is something that I would have put on the table by at least someone, that is an option that they could choose. At the very least, I would think Tuvok would think that killing them is an option. We have just officially made an enemy of someone who was not only already our enemy, but now is far more motivated to be so. They are going to be less kind in their future encounters if we just abstractly kill them when they come after us. This will escalate the conflict. So that's a problem. If we just let them go, we have the potential risk of showing that we are too weak, or that we don't have the capacity to defend ourselves, which is also a problem. If we try to come up with some compromise and let them hear and leave like a warning buoy, that's almost as bad as the last thing, And we can't open up negotiation with these people. Well, okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. And the final option is to open up negotiation with these people and basically endorse Seska's plan, and try to negotiate with them. All of these plans have downsides. All of these plans have very few upsides. In other words, there is no good choice here. There are only bad choices. Now, you may out there be thinking, well, what's the bad choice about trading their technology? These people have already shown that they are advanced and capable and dedicated enough to simply take what they want. Trying to trade with someone who is willing to take what they want in good faith, not a good idea. Trying to take from someone who is in a superior position to you in virtually every way, much worse idea. If you'll forgive me for quoting Talon Card here, I wouldn't trade with someone who's sitting on a Star Destroyer in orbit with me, even if he was the most trustworthy person in the world. Which he's not. That's a bit paraphrased, but the point remains. It's a very important point. Any deal negotiated effectively at gunpoint is a deal that is circumspect. And even though these Terran Ox, these members of the Terran Ox Alliance do not have the gun drawn and pointed at you yet, the fact that they have the gun ready right there soils any dealings you're going to make with them. And keep in mind again, if they were to go through with this deal, they would be putting themselves completely at their mercy. And we already know that the Terran Ox are an alliance of many people who have political problems. So even if the people they make the deal with decide to go ahead with it, that doesn't mean the deal is going to be finished or finalized in good faith. There could be change in political winds. There could be change in leadership. There could be dissidents who decide they don't want to deal with this. There are so many complications there. And all of this would be discussed at this. And finally, the net result would be... Well, that's actually a really good question. Now that I think about it, it occurs to me that I actually hadn't decided between the three options yet. Because that's kind of the problem. This is one of those times which I wish I could go to other writers and be like, hey, what do you think? But I personally think the best result for the future of the series would be to let them go with a very strict warning. And yes, I know they did that with the Vidians, but ultimately, the problem... Again, none of these are good answers. If they try to negotiate, they have effectively given away anything and everything they have. They are completely helpless and at their mercy, and I think several people would point that out and point out that that is not really a viable option. If they kill them, they have escalated the problem, and that makes things worse at the very least. Letting them go is basically their only option. So I would have Janeway go ahead and talk to the Tuvok wannabe. Tim Russ would be pulling some extra duties in this episode, and tell him, you have been, you have been treating with us in good faith. We do not wish to treat with you. We have no reason to believe that you will keep any end of your deal or bargain, and we do not believe that altering... Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't even mention this. We do not believe that altering the balance of power within this entire region, within this entire quadrant, irrevocably, is something that we want on our conscience right now. And so that would be another reason why dealing with them might be a bad idea, because who knows if the Terran Ox are going to be any better or worse than the Conclave, and indeed, let's not forget that the Conclave could also take this technology from the Terran Ox, just like they took their sovereignty. So they basically say, we can't do this, we can't trade with you, that we can't trust you enough, and we don't know enough about what would happen, and the risks of completely destabilizing the political and military situation with this region are huge. You have been treating with us in good faith. We do not wish to cause you harm. We have disabled certain parts of your ship, but we have not disabled its communications. You'll be able to signal for help, blah, blah, blah. And they would put them on the ship and leave them go. And as they leave, one of the last lines I would have of the episode would be Janeway turning to Neelix and saying, "So tell me about this conclave." And that would be, cut to credits right at the end there. Now, I'm done. I'm basically done, but I hope you guys are enjoying. I'm certainly actually really enjoying this whole alternate Voyager storyline thing, and I intend to keep going with it. Hopefully. Maybe not. Maybe I might be horrible. Who knows? But anyways, I will talk to you guys probably tomorrow. I think I've done enough videos tonight. So, peace, guys.